Okay. Good afternoon, everybody, and a very, very warm welcome to today's webinar focusing on the HR Dispute Resolution Toolkit. My name is David Liddell. I'm the CEO and the founder of the TCM Group, and it's great to have you here with me today, helping to develop constructive approaches to resolving some of the difficult and challenging situations that I know many of you face in your organisations day in, day out. Dealing with grievances, allegations of bullying, allegations of harassment, falling out, disagreements. In the case of the high-profile fracas at the BBC recently, the occasional punch being thrown between employees in the workplace. Difficult, challenging situations that we often find, the remedies don't often appear and they're not that easy to resolve. So today what I'm hoping to do is to give you some practical tools, tips and advice on finding more constructive remedies to these difficult situations. So welcome. So my name is David, as I've mentioned, and I have with me Elaine.
Good afternoon.
So this is Elaine's first webinar. So Elaine is a recent addition to the TCM team, and Elaine comes with a wide background in HR, Elaine.
Yes, my profession used to be HR, so I have a bit of experience with conflict and workplace conflict and how disruptive it can be to someone who works in HR, as I'm sure it is to most people in the workplace. But what I found is that a lot of the times conflict does interrupt your daily routine at work, whether it be the conflicted parties coming to you for a whinge or something more serious. So mediation is definitely a good tool to be able to confront these problems before they escalate and become damaging.
Absolutely, and it's great to have you here, Elaine, to give us sort of the HR perspective and also the mediator's perspective. So the webinar is scheduled to last for 45 minutes. I realised as I was writing the webinar that trying to cover quite so many tools in 45 minutes might be a challenge, but I'm going to try and ensure it comes in at 45 minutes. It will be recorded, it is being recorded today, and will be transcribed, and I will get the transcription typed up and actually turned in to an HR dispute resolution toolkit. And once that's been done, I'll send that out to you as well, so you've actually got a written copy of the toolkit as well as today's webinar. There will be a poll at the end of the webinar, but there's plenty of opportunities to ask questions throughout. If you've got something that you'd like to check in with Elaine and I, you should see in front of you a little dashboard. One of the areas there has got the word question. If you've got any questions, please do type it in there, and there'll be several points during the webinar today where we'll stop, take any questions that you've got and try and answer them. In particular, if there's anything that I say that you think would be useful but you want to get a little bit more information or you're not sure how it would work, again, please do feel free to fire away any questions. My genuine hope is that you leave today's webinar with some practical tools, tips and advice to help you go back to your workplaces and resolve disputes more effectively. I'll be mentioning the model resolution policy, which is now in place in a number of organisations and is actually the key starting point for constructive dispute resolution. That usually sells for £200. For anyone who's on this webinar, we will provide you with a free copy of the model resolution policy. And dealing with conflicts and disputes, Elaine, it can be like walking through treacle. It can be difficult, but nonetheless, I hope that today we focus on sort of the lighter side as well, and hopefully that you'll enjoy and have a bit of fun today dealing with, I know, a serious topic, but something that I hope we can enjoy learning different approaches to that.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Okay. So that's me. So I've been in the field of mediation, dispute resolution, non-violence for over 20 years. My background is in race relations and community relations. I ran a large mediation charity, promoting mediation in schools, in prisons, across communities in Leicestershire for 8 years before I went on to set up TCM, Total Conflict Management, in 2001, having studied an MBA in the Leicester Business School. I was fortunate enough to be awarded 2 contracts very early on in my career with 2 large London boroughs, Hounslow and Croydon councils, and that gave me an opportunity to see how mediation fitted in and dovetailed in to some quite complex and challenging organisational environments. And I was particularly focusing on developing dignity at work programmes, bullying and harassment programmes, as well as grievance resolution. And I saw then some of the tools and approaches that were used within organisations to resolve disputes and conflicts. And my experience led me to believe that many organisations have become incredibly focused on process, procedural fairness, the idea that we can go into a process of dispute resolution and out at the end of it, it will spit out two happy parties and they'll get back to work, they'll skip through the meadow, they'll sing Kumbaya, and they're going to be happy working together again. What actually it spat out was unhappy people, upset people, disengaged people, sad people, people in pain, people hurting, people worrying. It spat out cost, money, cost, stress, more money, more money, more money. And my experience has told me very quickly that effective dispute resolution cannot rely on what I call dispute escalation policies of the kind that a grievance procedure is. They require dispute resolution from HR professionals, unions and others within our organisations. So I created the Fair Mediation Framework. That's now in place in over 4,000 organisations across the UK and overseas have now embedded the Fair Mediation model. And that includes Royal Mail Group, Transport for London, BT, Marks and Spencer's, EDF Energy, Lloyds Banking Group, right the way across several Whitehall departments, the Home Office amongst many others, right the way through to smaller organisations. I wish I could write more, Elaine. I never seem to get the chance, but I've got a lot to say, so this is a nice way for me to say it. And I'm also the president and the founder of our trade body, the Professional Mediators Association. This is the trade body for mediators in the UK, promoting excellence and standards for all mediators and professionals in the area of dispute resolution. So just a little bit of TCL. I know many on the webinar you'll know our organisation, but just to remind you, so we're a management consultancy with a little bit of a difference, a bit of an interesting twist to our work. I mean, everyone's passionate about dialogue and collaboration and people. It seems to be all we see on LinkedIn. But I guess for 20 years, I've been working at the other end of the spectrum, is when dialogue breaks down, collaboration doesn't exist, and it's replaced by conflict, and where people's relationships are toxic. So I've seen mediation addressing these issues at a very kind of basic level, and I'm very passionate about the power of dialogue, collaboration, and people engaging with each other to resolve disputes more effectively. And we have a mission to become the world leaders in all aspects of collaborative processes. So we've been around for 14 years. We provide employee, industrial relations, consulting and training services. Over 300 organisations have actually embedded a fully integrated resolution scheme, and I'll be drawing on some of those examples, having a fully integrated approach within their organisations. And we have a full-time team of mediators and trainers, of which Elaine is one of those here in central London with associates across the UK, and we're accredited by Customer First. So that's a little bit about me, about the organisation, and about Elaine as well. Okay, so we have a question. Let me just have a little look. I'm getting interference on the line, not easy to follow. Jenny, thank you for your message there. Can I just check? I've got, okay, we're just checking the sound quality. I'm getting a thumbs up from a couple of people saying the sound quality is okay. So apologies if you're getting an echo or some interference on the line. We have just done a sound check, and Sally, you've just confirmed, and Sherry, you've just confirmed as well. So thank you very much for that. And again, as I've suggested, if you've got any questions, please do ask those, but I'm glad you can hear me okay. Okay, so what we're going to be focusing on today for the Dispute Resolution Toolkit. We'll focus on the role of triage. It's really important to identify an early route to resolution in any dispute. What I often find is dispute resolution is left to the very last minute as the parties are staring into what I call the precipice of doom. And it's at that point that everyone tries to rally around and identify the most effective route to resolution, often when the parties are experiencing severe distress, anxiety, concern, HR are involved, unions are involved, managers are involved, the parties may have begun a formal process. What I'll be focusing on is an early triage process driven predominantly by HR, but it may be undertaken by union or senior managers to identify the most effective route to resolution at a much earlier stage of the dispute life cycle. We'll look at the role of the facilitated conversation. Now, the facilitated conversation is what you might call mediation light, but it's a very important way of delivering a resolution process, and HR professionals are really well placed to deliver facilitated conversations or mediation light conversations at an earlier stage of a conflict before it escalates to bring our parties together. They can also be delivered by grandparent managers, senior managers and others in the organisation. But it's a particularly valuable role, I think, for the HR professional, or of course for the union professional as well. We'll also look at the role of the manager and the leader, and the role that HR can play in mentoring and coaching managers to have constructive conversations at an earlier stage. When I'm working with organisations, many of whom have adopted an Ulrich model or variation on the Ulrich model, they require their managers to handle the transactional nature of the policy areas around capability, absence, grievance, discipline in particular. And that requires the manager to be able to have a difficult conversation with their employees over a wide range of issues. But the managers haven't been trained, they're not supported. In fact, they don't even know it's their role. They often resist those issues of management and actually expect HR to do it. So we'll look at the role of HR in actually mentoring managers to go back and have these difficult conversations.
I mean, I quite often, in my previous roles, have had instances where, the phone would be ringing off the hook when the organisation's perhaps going through a difficult phase.
Yeah.
And the employees would ring to basically express how unhappy they are in the role, unfair treatment by a colleague. And what we used to do is just sort of say, well, have you discussed this with your manager?
Yeah.
Have you talked to your manager? And we don't actually, we haven't in the places that I've worked, step in until someone makes it formal. Someone makes a formal complaint.
Yeah.
So what we used to do is try and bat it back to the manager,
Yeah.
who then quite often felt that they can't really deal with it in such a sense of the word. Our managers are often people who are very good at their job, maybe not so great at dealing with people and emotions and upset. But then we found that the managers wouldn't come back to us and say, I need help. They would quite often not want to admit that they have that particular need. So I think that could be a problem when it comes to, making sure that they are on board.
Absolutely, you're absolutely right, Elaine. I think it's really important. It's really important that when we're talking with managers, that getting support from HR is not a sign of weakness, and going to HR is not a threat. I mean, I've often heard people describe going to HR. I'll go to HR. It's seen as a threat, where the HR professionals are an enabler of engagement and well-being and talent and retention and driving a really positive working environment. Yeah. How did we get to the point of going to HR as seen as a threat? And one of the things, we won't focus on it here today because I have focused on leadership in previous webinars, is the importance of developing clear behavioural or leadership competences against which we appoint our managers. So it's clearly stated when we're hiring our managers that we expect them to be able to demonstrate empathy, understanding, appreciation, the ability to communicate effectively, to negotiate outcomes effectively to difficult situations. And if those competencies aren't clearly stated, then our poor managers are stuck often between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
So let's look at how we can resolve that today. We'll spend a bit of time thinking about some of these formal processes and how to do them effectively, investigations, hearings, appeals, and so on and so forth. We'll look at how, as an HR professional, you can measure the impact of grievances. Again, I've run webinars previously on developing a business case for mediation. These are all online, by the way, on our YouTube channel if you want to listen to them. But I'll spend a bit of time helping you to gather some core data to help you measure the real impact of grievances, because it's useful to have the evidence base in order to persuade others that maybe the time for change is upon us. We'll look at how to support return to work processes through mediation, and ultimately, of course, identify the value of embedding mediation into HR policies and procedures. So, wow, Elaine, we've got a lot to cover, but let's crack on.
Okay.
So here's the kind of stuff that we're talking about: falling out, not seeing eye to eye. I suppose at one level it's the petty side of people issues. I suppose it gets more serious: fracas, punching, as we talked about already, the physicality of it, bullying, harassment, grievances, stress, anxiety, damage into the team's low productivity, of course, as the language becomes hardened and the conflict develops, employment tribunal, settlement agreement, COP3s, absence, and so on and so forth. What we're talking about is conflict in the workplace. And conflict doesn't have to be destructive and negative and harmful. Conflict itself is a neutral phenomenon. It's neither good nor bad. Conflict becomes negative and destructive in the way that we manage it or the way that we handle it. Now, the challenge we face as human beings is we all think we're right. We don't walk into work in the morning and think, oh no, not another day to be wrong in the office. We walk into work, we think we're right, then we believe that we've been wronged by the other person, maybe the way they've spoken to us or reacted to us, and we adopt this polarity or this binary position. I win, you lose. I'm right, you're wrong. I'll defend my position. It's on the principle. I'll see you in court. Who do you think you are? I can't trust you. You're a bully. It's your fault. And what happens in our organisations, subconsciously, unconsciously, is our organisations' policies and procedures actually actively encourage this kind of behaviour. This is the incredible thing. Our organisations complain and get very upset about the cost and the harm of these issues, but in actual fact, when we look at our policies and procedures, they're intrinsically adversarial. They actually encourage the parties to adopt these kind of positions, and that then takes up an enormous amount of time within our organisations that we don't know how to deal with. Well, we need to deal with these issues at source. We need to understand what's going wrong in our internal policies and procedures that's creating a culture that actually promotes that kind of issue and that level of animosity. Well, to begin, I focus on our policies and procedures, taking a macro look at the organisation, and then we'll start to move in to some core behaviours and tools. Our policies, as you've heard me talk before, I'm sure if you've listened to me on webinars or in presentations, they are reactive. You have to press the nuclear option in order to be able to trigger the process. You've already decided to go into grievance. You know your relationship's never going to be the same again. And then someone says, oh, would you be willing to mediate or go and meet the other person? Well, no, I wouldn't, thank you very much. I've decided to take a grievance out and I want them sacked. Why would I want to meet them? I've already made a decision to go through formal process. So they're very reactive. They're intrinsically adversarial. They promote a winner and a loser. The organisation requires, on the balance of probability, sufficient evidence in order to conduct a reasonable investigation, to make a reasonable determination about what steps and actions to be able to take in terms of achieving one of the test, the Virchow test. So on the balance of probability, there is a winner and a loser, but there is no right or wrong in conflict. It's about perceptions, opinions, hopes, fears, needs, goals, aspirations, emotions. All of the stuff that happens in conflict cannot be taken account of in a standard procedural framework. And in doing so, then they actually polarise our parties. And they don't identify the root cause of conflict. And many of the tools that I'll share today are about getting to the root cause of conflict. The root cause of conflict is our unmet needs, unexpressed values, unachieved hopes and desires and dreams that we've not been able to fulfill, that are causing us to feel a sense of loss and frustration and pain and hurt, that we need to be able to communicate. We need to be able to be heard. We need someone to listen to us. So the needs of our businesses aren't taken care of, and that actually impedes creativity, holding people back from being innovative and creative, unless receiving a 40-page grievance with all of the flowery language that we might find in them is the kind of creativity we want in our organisations. But as we seem to be coming out of recession now, as the credit crunch seems to be coming to an end, our organisations require our employees to be innovative and creative. And that means that disruptive people in our organisation who actually can be very challenging to manage, we actually need to start listening to these people, because that's where the innovation comes from. And the challenge with these grievance processes and formal processes is they actually impede people disrupting the status quo, because they actually prevent them from having their say, because the process doesn't allow that to happen. And they create these kind of negative cultures, grievance, entitlement and litigation. It's all about me. Self-centred and selfish. And when we're looking at organisations, we take a look at the organisation from the whole. So in terms of the toolkit for yourselves, if you're thinking about embedding a resolution culture, there's three particular areas to focus on in the organisation. The first one is the governance, the values, the sort of shared values of the organisation, the strategy of the organisation, and there's a great example at Royal Mail and Parcel Force organisations that we've been working with now for a number of years. Those organisations have taken a long, hard look at themselves, and I remember meeting with Moya Green and the Postal Executive Committee of the CWU, the Communication Workers Union, and they were clear. Effective resolution and conflicts and disputes across the Royal Mail Group was absolutely central to the modernisation strategy and the future profitability and shareholder value for that organisation. This wasn't a nice to have, Elaine. Mediation and resolution was an absolute key need to have as part of their overarching strategy, as part of the culture of that organisation. And Royal Mail is a great example of an organisation who've embedded at a very deep level the whole process of resolution, mediation and dialogue building. Now, it's not long ago people saw Royal Mail as a basket case in relation to industrial relations and employee relations, and here they are now. Last year they won a CIPD award for outstanding practice in relation to employee relations and industrial relations. On the left-hand side, the blue triangle here is the psychological contract, the most important contract that exists in our organisations. Forget employment contracts, forget the written word, they don't really matter when it comes to dispute resolution. What really matters is the way you looked at me, the way you talked to me, the way you broke your promises to me, the way you haven't explained yourself to me, the way that I don't understand the decisions that you're making, the way that I don't get where I fit into the team, the fact I don't feel valued, I'm not engaged, I'm not doing the best that I can do. So the first thing on this is to actually help to embed a resolution culture within the organisation. Undertaking a cultural audit. What is the culture of the organisation? Embedding the model resolution policy. Triage we're focused on, and so on and so forth. We can then look at the role of managers and leaders, ensuring managers and leaders possess the necessary skills to handle people. Elaine, exactly as you've said, they're technically gifted, but are they gifted in people management? Well, in an environment where people are our businesses, our managers have to be gifted in people management.
I agree, and what we quite often found was that people would, you know, go over their manager's head straight to HR, to sort of a safe house. They know that's where they're going to be listened to.
Absolutely.
And my feeling was I would always ask them if they had spoken to their manager, and they would always say, well, no. It didn't occur to me to speak to my manager, and it just goes to show that a lot of times managers are at a bit of a loss on how to deal with this kind of conflict, and a lot of times the conflict is with the manager. So it becomes very difficult.
Absolutely. So people then go to HR and they get frustrated because no one's able to really deal with the issue.
Unless they want to make it official. Yes.
Exactly.
That was my approach in previous roles, because we didn't have an open communication system embedded at all.
Absolutely. So other organisations moving along here, they build up a mediation capacity using internal mediators or external mediators, and also focus on resolution with training investigating managers to identify opportunities for resolution. Can we stop the investigation process and allow the parties to come and mediate? Do our appeals processes and determination processes, are they sufficiently aware of resolution or reintegrative resolution tools to actually help the parties reintegrate a relationship after a determination has been reached? Because in the vast majority of bullying and harassment cases where an issue has been raised, generally for the first time by an employee against the manager, the most punitive sanction that's taken will be a written or a final written warning. Albeit that the employee wanted the manager sacked, the chances are they will be working together again.
Definitely, yeah.
And on the other side of it is the use of mediation in formal processes. So this is a holistic or whole systems approach to dispute resolution of the kind that Royal Mail Group, Lloyds Banking Group and others have now embedded. And we've just found out that a large London borough have equally, they've just embedded this thinking into their organisation. So the model resolution policy, you'll get a copy of this. This sets the tone for effective dispute resolution, and I'm just going to mention very quickly some of the key aspects to this. So it moves from grievance to resolution, formal to informal, defensive to open, combative to collaborative, argument to mediation, lose-lose to win-win. It promotes and encourages positive relationship and constructive dialogue. It's about leaders and managers walking the talk and bringing our parties together to have open conversations. And it's drawing on the values. Now, these are the kind of values that most organisations would espouse, Elaine. There's nothing here that most organisations don't subscribe to. Fairness, mutual respect, empathy, dignity, dialogue. I could walk into any reception of any organisation anywhere in the UK and see these kind of values on the wall. What I don't see in terms of values are betrayal, vitriol, anger, frustration, wasted money, wasted time. So we're actually aligning the resolution process with the values of the modern progressive organisation, creating a fit between these two aspects, the fit between the policy and the stated values and the policy and the behaviours. This is a real alignment between those three core aspects. And the resolution approaches that we'll focus on in a moment: neutral evaluation and a resolution assessment or triage, facilitated conversations led by HR, union or senior managers, mediation, team development or team building, coaching, a resolution meeting which may have formerly been called informal resolution, I never quite knew what informal resolution meant. And of course it had one or two sentences, probably the most important part of grievance processes, unclearly stated and actually paradoxically had the least amount of ink allocated to it on paper. Investigations, of course, formal resolution meetings and appeals processes. So these are the steps that will be available to you if you were to apply something like the resolution policy in your organisation. So someone's asked if the slides will be available. They will be. I'll send the slides out after the presentation, so you've all got a copy of the slides. And like I say, it is being recorded, so it will be put up onto YouTube as well as being transcribed. So is there any other questions? I haven't seen any other questions coming through, but if you do have any other questions, you're welcome, Shay. Thank you. So if you've got any other questions, please do feel free to ask away. But what I'll do now is I'll carry on. So like I said, if you have got a question, please do put it into the question box on the dashboard and we'll do our best to answer them as we're going along. So let's look at tool number one, the triage. So how to triage a dispute? Well, what we need to be able to do is encourage our employees to come to us or a manager at a much earlier stage. I currently believe that things are left often too late, emotions become too hot, there's too much emotion, becomes too challenging, heels have been dug in, positions have been hardened. So the first messages to employees is please come and talk to us and we will help you to identify the most effective route to resolution. So the questions to be asking at the triage is, how serious is it? Whereabouts on the conflict life cycle is this? Every employee or everyone who's experienced a conflict believes it's serious because they feel they've been wronged, because they're right and the other person is attacking them, so they're defending themselves. But asking some questions, we might actually be able to elicit that there's a level of appreciation and empathy and understanding of each other's points of view. So in terms of the seriousness, it may well be at an earlier stage that the parties have, I don't know, maybe things aren't as entrenched, aren't as polarised as they may first appear. The way to understand this is to ask the parties, what's the impact of the situation? How does it make you feel? The F word of the modern organisation, feelings. And I was doing some training in a local authority yesterday, and we were doing work on feelings. In fact, we were together, Elaine. And we did some role plays, and they asked every single question that you can imagine asking, but when it came to feelings, there was a sort of avoidance of asking the feelings question. I think we're so scared of the snot and tears that comes about when we're asked the feelings. We need to ask, how do you feel? Because that's the gateway to understanding what we need to unlocking these. Sorry about my crude snots and tears reference, but those of you who deal with conflict, you'll know what I mean. So are the parties willing to engage in a resolution process, to listen to the other person, to take on board feedback, to give feedback, to make observations, to tell the other person how they feel? Importantly, to ask the other person how they feel. Now, my experience of conflict around this word empathy, which is what I'm referring to a lot here, is that the party, there's an empathy deficit because we forget that the other person has feelings, because the policies and procedures actually encourage us to dehumanise the other person. So what we're saying here is actually, let's bring some humanity back. How are you feeling and how do you think the other person is feeling? So what attempts have been made to resolve the situation previously? Have they worked? What can we learn from these? Have there been any previous complaints before? What number, the frequency and numbers? And the party's own goals to resolution. What do they need? What do they want to achieve? Now, what they might say is, I want the other person sacked. I want to be moved department. I want. I want is not a need. What I need is to be valued, to be heard, to be understood, to be treated with respect. So the question in your toolkit here for the triage stage is to get away from wants to focus instead on needs. Now you may have others that you wish to ask as the triage is going through, but these are some important questions. They're moving us away, you'll notice, from facts, evidence, corroboration and mitigation. We're not encouraging them to go away and make diary notes and audit trails, collect evidence and record information. That's gone. What we're focusing on here is how can you get together to resolve the situation.
David, I quite often I just have a question in my role in HR. What I can imagine is, when would be the best time to start this advice of open communication? Because there would be people who would come to us just with a general moan, oh, you won't believe what such and such has done today. And then it would start to develop into, I'm having a bit of a problem with this person, I'm getting annoyed by this behavior, and then full out confrontation, conflict, problem. When in those instances would be the best time to maybe start being aware that something's, that the annoyance with one another is going to turn into conflict? And what can we do?
Well, I think it's already turning into conflict. If people are finding each other's behaviours in the workplace annoying and irritating at a low level, they're already starting to enter into the conflict zone. They're starting to experience that fight or flight reaction, and coming and having a bit of a moan and a bit of a vent may be useful for them to let off a bit of steam. But it's actually a really clear symptom to me that there's a problem within that relationship that will be worth a bit closer scrutiny in order to be able to resolve it. Because ultimately a moan and a vent may let off a bit of steam, but it doesn't help to resolve the situation. And HR's role isn't to act as a someone who can just be moaned at. HR's role is to help those people to go back and find a resolution. So I would use even those low-level moans as an opportunity to start to identify, can we get this resolved? Can you get this resolved? What needs to change in order to be able to, for you to feel happier, more comfortable, more certain in your role?
Okay.
So I'd say even at those low levels. And here's some questions that I would use during the triage process. So what have they observed happening? Now encourage the person to apply a non-blaming account. We're so quick to blame. We're so quick to point the finger. We're so quick to avoid taking responsibility. It's all them. It's all about them. They're entirely at fault. Well, they're not. We're all a little bit responsible for the situation. So let's try and avoid using the blaming language. HR can actively discourage blame by inviting the person to talk about what they've observed happening, by not blaming the other person, depersonalize it. Consider the impact on the person, on the other person, on the colleague or the manager, and on the relationship. So do a very full appraisal of the feelings embedded in the situation. Now the feelings are the gateway to unlocking the potential resolution. If we don't ask about the feelings and the emotions and the impact, it's very difficult to resolve it. So we need to ask those questions. And based on that, what does the person need to happen in order to help to bring about a resolution? So you can start to do a future focus, identifying potential routes to resolution and particular remedies, which encourages a solution-focused mentality rather than just focusing on the past from the point of view of who's most at fault. If they were sat here with the other person now, what would they ask them to do differently in order to be able to bring about a resolution? I love that question. It's a hypothetical question, and it encourages them to think creatively about the kind of requests. I'm talking requests here, Elaine, not demands. So what kind of requests would they encourage for people to the modifications to behaviour to help them to get a situation, a successful situation? And what attempts have been made to resolve the situation previously, and what blocks and barriers might there be, and how can they be overcome? And acknowledging that it's not an easy thing to do. Now, we've got a question here. So, Kate, thank you very much for your question. What would you advise if an employee wanted to remain anonymous during the triage, if they're having issues with their manager but too afraid to make it known in the fear of the reaction it may have? Well, it's a really interesting point, because it suggests a fundamental breakdown in the psychological contract. I'm so fearful, I'm so worried, I'm so anxious of my manager that I can't actually even begin a process of trying to resolve the situation. I think that's a terribly sad position to find ourselves in. I think it suggests a significant and chronic breakdown. And I'm not sure that an organisation that we can actually accept that as being an acceptable position for us to find ourselves in. Now let's remind ourselves of something. I can't trust the other person as far as I throw them. Well, you would say that. You're in conflict. They're going to take out some retaliation and repercussions against me because they're in a more powerful position. Well, you would say that. You're in conflict and they have a position of authority. So I would suggest, Kate, that in actual fact, it's a responsibility to you as an HR professional, to them as an employee, and to the manager to sit down and find a route through this. Now, anonymous complaints actually achieve nothing. They flag an issue, but you can't do anything with it. Now, I can understand an anonymous complaint if we're not wanting to tip into a formal process, But in terms of generating a resolution process, I would be strongly advocating that the employee gave you, Kate, and your colleagues an opportunity to help try and find a successful resolution. We need to listen to them. We need to recognise that engaging with the manager is an incredibly courageous thing for them to do. But there isn't actually an awful lot of options. Because what choices do they have if they feel that scared that they can't sit down with their manager with your support? So, same question, Kerry, what would you advise when someone says, I want to just have a conversation, just so HR are aware? But again, it's what benefit does that conversation have? If the benefit of the conversation is that you've got a file note which will help you in a future investigation into a bullying or harassment allegation, one can understand that. But we're not talking about that here. We're talking about resolving the situation. And we need to go back to our employee and make it clear that our organisation is committed to resolving issues through dialogue. That's the organisation you've signed up to. It's stated in our values, it's stated in our policies, it's stated in our procedures. Our organisation resolves things by talking and listening. And we, although we know it's difficult for you, we expect you to subscribe to those same principles. So off-the-record conversations and anonymous conversations, yes, I can understand the need of them, and yes, I can understand people letting off a bit of steam, but at the same time, they don't actually take us any further forward.
No, but it is quite difficult because we often get those kinds of questions where someone says, can I have an off-the-record conversation? I just want to make you aware. But, it's very difficult to see what stays off the record and what needs to be escalated, because it might be, what if it's gross misconduct, or you can't really make that promise very easily. So it is very difficult, but you're still obligated to listen. So that is a very difficult situation to have.
It is difficult. But I think in some respects the toxic relationship or the damage to the relationship and the fact they want to go off the record suggests that they don't actually want to go into formal process. And what we're advocating is a non-formal approach.
Yes, so that it might be very helpful.
Yeah, I think in that respect what you're doing is you're triggering a resolution approach. Now, having an off-the-record conversation means that I don't want to go down the nuclear option. I don't want to jump into the precipice of doom.
Yeah.
Now, we're actually saying, well, the precipice of doom, the grievance process or bullying and harassment policy or whatever, that is a precipice of doom, and I can kind of understand why you wouldn't want to go down that route. I can kind of understand why you'd want to have an off-the-record conversation.
And mediation is off the record, isn't it? It is
Absolutely.
Confidential, so
Absolutely.
That's a solution you can offer. It is confidential. We don't keep any records of it, so this is a way for you to have that off-the-record conversation with the person you're having a conflict with.
Absolutely. And if we look at Toolkit 2, let's look at our managers and leaders, because both of these questions suggest that we're anxious about speaking to the managers and leaders. So managers and leaders are absolutely key to helping to resolve these issues, but they're often struggle, they don't feel confident, competent or courageous enough to have these conversations. So this is if you're an HR professional and your manager's asking you, what can I do to have these conversations? This might be some advice that you'd like to give to your managers. Firstly is establish a safe space for dialogue. Have it away from the main workplace. Think about the venue. If you're going to have it in your office, are you going to sit behind your desk, or are you going to have it as a sort of a meeting environment? Close the door, give yourself adequate time, turn Outlook off, and allow a good 15, 20, 30 minutes opportunity to speak. Make sure that you're not rushing into another meeting. So think about the environment that you're creating to ensure it's a safe space. Create some basic ground rules. I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to ask you to listen to me. We need to be respectful of each other. State those implicit ground rules that exist between us, but make them explicit. Give the other person a jolly good listening to. Let them talk. Don't interrupt them. Don't judge them. Don't blame them. Don't evaluate what they're saying. Let them say what they need to say and really hear. Listen for meaning, not listen to defend your position as a manager. They will tell you what the problems are. They'll tell you what's keeping them awake at night. They'll tell you what's causing the stress and anxiety. And what they'll say often is, thank you so much for listening to me. And when I'm a mediator in a case and I ask the parties what they found useful about mediation, the thing that people say to me time and time and time again is, David, you really listened to me. I said, I can't be the first person who's listened to you. They said, David, you're the first person in 5 or 10 years who's really listened to me. Everyone else has dodged the issue. They've given the impression of listening, but in actual fact, they've never really tried to hear and understand what it is that I'm saying. So ask open questions, check in, probe and clarify, really engage with the person. Constantly summarise back what you've heard as a manager, play back to the person so they know that you're really listening and feeding back to them that you're hearing what they're saying. Show them a little empathy, that you can put yourself in their shoes, that you can understand it from their point of view, that you can show that compassion, that sensitivity, that empathy for their point of view. Remain neutral and impartial, don't get drawn in or sucked in to a particular viewpoint. And encourage the person when they're speaking to balance the past, the present and the future. In organisations we're very hung up on the past and the present, but we do very little when it comes to grievance resolution about the future, because again the procedure doesn't allow us to, because it's not ready for the future. Whereas in resolution and mediation terms, the future is absolutely key. Depersonalise the situation, avoid blaming and encourage others to do the same. And if you as a manager can role model these kind of behaviours, that will actively encourage the other person to do the same. So think of yourself as a manager, as a role model to your employees, and demonstrate your effective leadership through the kind of questions and interactions that you're having. People will soon grow to trust you. No one's going to want to talk to HR and have an off-the-record conversation when their manager's acting in this way. Now, it may well be the manager is not able to have that conversation for whatever reason. There might be too strong feelings or they're conflicted. So this may well be an opportunity for HR to say, well, look, let's try and get together around the table and have a mediation light meeting or a facilitated conversation. The first thing, and that might be a union representative working alongside an HR representative, and I've seen that happening increasingly in organisations, unions and HR working together, or one or others, or a line manager, senior manager. So it could be anyone who does it. They need to be skilled to an extent. First thing they need to do is to secure a commitment to the facilitated conversation. Ensure that people are subscribing to the conversation, they know what they're getting themselves involved into, basically. That they recognise what they're about to get into. Set aside a half a day. It's going to take a half a day. That might sound like a lot of time, but if you actually add up all of those conversations that you've been talking about, Elaine, at your desk, where people have been moaning and whinging, it'll probably be in way in excess of half a day. Yeah, exactly. So half a day might sound a lot, but it's probably not. And identify a neutral venue, somewhere you can go off-site or on-site, but away from the main workplace. Meet the parties separately, so go and listen to them and let them tell you about their situation. Now, we know they'll have their positions. I'm right, you're wrong, they're to blame, all of the stuff I've talked about already. But under that, their feelings and the emotions, their interests, their needs, their goals, their perceptions, their perspectives, their hopes, their fears. And of course, there'll be some facts and evidence, an email here, a bit of data there. So let them share their narrative. And then once we've met them separately, let's bring them together. Where's that photo gone? That photo was an image. You've probably just caught a glimpse of it, but it was the quickest facilitated conversation that I've ever seen. That was the two parties sat around the table with our HR professional. So at the joint meeting, the facilitated conversation, establish some ground rules. It's about respect, openness, really listening to each other, and confidentiality is what's said in that meeting stays in the meeting. So you can actually share things that you may not normally share during another process. Invite each of the parties to talk to each other directly about why they're at the mediation process. Ask each of the parties questions about what their impact of the situation is. What do they need? What are the consequences of not getting this solved today? What are the consequences of getting it solved today? And once both parties have spoken and you've asked each of the parties the questions, then summarise back what you've heard.
Do you get them to address each other?
Absolutely, yeah. So turn to the other person. Don't talk to you, the HR professional, about the other person in the third person. Turn to the other person directly and speak directly to each other. So once they've done that and you've identified the impact and the needs and the consequences of success and failure, summarise that back and then invite the parties to have an open exchange. Your job now is to manage that exchange process. Ask questions, check in, clarify and probe, but in essence it's their conversation. But what you'll start to hear is the parties will begin to identify some very powerful things. The benefit of hindsight, so now I know, so now I've got this information that when I called you that name or said that to you, it made you feel upset. With the benefit of hindsight, I wouldn't have said that. If I'd have known then that it made you so upset, I wouldn't have said it then. So the question the facilitator asks is, now you've got that new information, What will you do differently tomorrow to change your behaviours and build a stronger relationship? To convert hindsight to insight, insight to understanding, understanding drives change. It's my insight change model. Very powerful. We're going to run webinars on this. It's a very powerful way of delivering constructive behavioural change in conflict situations, and we use it a lot in our mediation work. So moving into problem solving, identifying actions, and they might be simple. Saying good morning to each other. They're sharing the right information when they do the handover for job share partners. Being courteous to each other in team meetings, attending one-to-ones. This isn't rocket science. It's often the basic stuff. In fact, someone said to me, isn't this, David, just common sense? Someone said this recently. I said, absolutely, it's just common sense. But it's common sense at a time where common sense often doesn't leap out of the window. And that's the problem with conflicts and disputes. Common sense does a flying leap out of the open window, hopefully not followed by one of the parties, of course. And all we're trying to do is to bring some common sense back to the room. But I do think maybe we've lost that common sense. I'm a massive fan of common sense in resolution approaches. I've been driving common sense as part of these processes for a long time. Now I'm conscious of time and trying to cover off these 4 complex areas of employee relations. I'm not going to get a chance to be able to do so. But again, we run webinars and workshops on each of these areas. So neutral evaluations is a fact-finding situation, can be really useful as a precursor to an investigation. It's more limited than an investigation, and it's in essence it's a name for a fact find. Investigations we'll know about, having clearly defined terms of reference, allegations that we're reporting against, with a well-written, well-organised report with sufficient evidence and appendices in order to be able to prove or disprove each of the allegations or the terms of reference. And again, I read some really terrible reports that have taken months, in some cases years, to actually produce, while people have been suspended or in a really difficult place in their relationship. The one thing I would say about the workplace investigation is be thorough, be fair, be robust, but do it in a timely way and get the parties out of the process and back to work as quickly as you can. Determination process and panels, again, you'll have those in place for reaching determinations, but my advice is to train or notify these panels and appeals panels that you promote resolution processes and reintegration after a determination has been reached, particularly in grievance, bullying, harassment, discrimination cases. Mediation can work very well after an appeal has been concluded. So that's probably as much as I'll say on those particular areas, but again, we do run information sessions on those. So the last couple of toolkits ready, and then we'll conclude. So the measuring the impact of grievances, this is worth doing, particularly because we've talked a lot about some of the toolkits to help you ask the right questions, to triage a case, to bring the parties together, to have a facilitated conversation. This is about building the evidence of the need to change. So looking at the cost of conflict to your organisation, the impact on employee engagement, the impact on employee well-being, stress and absence, the time that your managers are spending dealing with these grievances, the amount of time you're spending in HR on them, how satisfied are your employees? Do you actually ask them how satisfied they are? How much do you spend on settlement agreements and payoffs, employment tribunals, reputation? So these are costs which need to be accounted. And again, working with the same organisation yesterday, I referenced, they identified that the mean cost of a grievance was £10,000 when you take into account all of the time spent as a mean cost. One organisation was in excess of £20,000 per grievance. Now, I'm not saying that all organisations have lots of grievances and they're not all going to cost that much. But bearing in mind that that is a significant amount of money if you have a lot of grievances, to actually set up a fully integrated and embedded mediation and resolution programme is going to cost around £30,000. That might be the cost of one settlement agreement. At Royal Mail, 100% of cases referred for mediation have resulted in a satisfactory outcome, a written agreement between the two parties. When Lloyds Banking Group applied for the Personnel Today Award last year for the HR Impact Award, they stated on the Personnel Today website that as a result of introducing a resolution approach within their organisation, they saved £450,000 worth of costs to the business within the first 10 weeks, £450,000 in 10 weeks. In actual fact, they saw a reduction in grievances by 50%. And here's a toolkit I'll send out to you after the webinar, as well to help you to measure the cost of conflict. So I'll put this onto the email along with the model resolution policy. So mediation just coming to an end. I know we're a little bit over time, so apologies for that. I did think we were trying to cover an awful lot in what was a short space of time. I perhaps approached this in a slightly overly optimistic way, Elaine, but I think we're coming to an end now.
Not too bad.
So many of you will be familiar with mediation, I'm sure. So it's a non-adversarial way of resolving difficult situations. Mediation is a mindset, a way of thinking. It's a framework, a way of doing. It's a set of skills, a way of behaving. So mediation is more than just a Kofi Annan-esque figure parachuting into a war zone to resolve it. It's more than that. So mediators are neutral. They help the parties have a mutually acceptable discussion to reach a mutually acceptable outcome, a win-win outcome. It's about collaborating, not blaming. And the agreement in mediation comes directly from the parties. The mediator doesn't judge. We don't tell them what they should do. And mediation is both voluntary and confidential. So it's a very powerful process, and it's in use in a great many organisations, including, I know, many on today's webinar. And here are some of the benefits of mediation in terms of the human cost and the financial cost. So in terms of finances, less time spent by managers and HR, lower levels of grievances and complaints, lower levels of investigations and terminations, reduced legal costs, absence, attrition, increased productivity, goodwill, team working, managerial confidence, employee engagement, employee well-being. I'm actually an engagement guru on Engage for Success, and David McLeod speaks passionately about the importance of mediation as part of employee engagement. And again, I've run webinars and written papers. And if you're interested, I've written a paper on employee engagement, which is on my LinkedIn profile. So, see if there's any further questions before we begin to draw it to a session. So what I'd like to do now is just really run a poll at the end of the session. So I've provided an awful lot of information. And thanks, Elaine, for your first webinar. I hope you've enjoyed it yourself.
Yeah, interesting.
Fantastic. Okay, so just get the polls up in front of me. Where's the polls gone? I can't see it there. Okay, so I'm just going to run the poll. It has today been a useful day in terms of helping you to handle disputes more effectively. So you've got a yes or no. I'll keep it open for a little while. Obviously, I'd be interested to hear any feedback that you might have about your experience today in terms of its usefulness. Okay, so I'm going to close it off in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so I can publish the results. So as you can see, thank you very much. I'm glad that's been useful. So over 90% of you said it has been useful. To those of you who haven't found it useful, my apologies. I hope that you'll let me know how I could have made it more useful for you in the future. But for those of you who have found it useful, I wish you the very, very best of luck in terms of embedding some of these approaches into your organisations. So obviously we do a lot at TCO, a little bit of a plug for us. We provide a lot of support to organisations. We do facilitated conversations training, which is a 2-day course for HR professionals. We run mediation skills training. We run the flagship training course, the National Certificate in Workplace Mediation. We run it in our training centre here in London, and we also come on site to run training courses. The cost for training is around £2,000 for the full accredited certificate in training. If we come on site and run it as for a group on site, it's actually an awful lot less. It's a significant discount that we offer to organisations who run it on site. So if you're interested in mediation skills training, please do let me know. We also provide mediation services. For £1,500, we can come on, send one of our expert mediators to your organisation and help to resolve the situation. Over 90% of our cases are resolved through mediation that refer to us, and bear in mind some of them are extremely challenging. Over 100% of cases in Royal Mail are resolved through mediation, so just give you a sense of what we can do. We provide leadership and management training. We have a diploma in people performance engagement and also our Better Resolutions program, and we set up internal mediation schemes. So a little bit about what we can do and how we might be able to help you in the future. But for now, Sorry again it's gone over, but thank you so much for listening. Thanks for participating. Elaine, thank you again for being here, and I wish you the very best in helping to resolve disputes in the future. Thank you very much, and we'll end it there. Bye-bye.